Two Bruins from last year's team remain unsigned, and maybe the Bruins are waiting for Jeremy Swayman to get done before revisiting contracts for Kevin Shattenkirk and James Van Riemsdyk.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans? Happy Monday and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Be. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your day every day, free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The sports aren't sportsing like we want them to during these summer months, but FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily all summer long. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. And you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. If you're new to the podcast, I'm a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been covering this team for various outlets for 20 years or so now. I was a full-time hockey news editor for thescore.com and have been hosting this podcast since 2019. Now, a lot of the talk with the Boston Bruins recently has been around Jeremy Swayman remaining unsigned. And last week I talked about how former Bruins goaltender and current NESN analyst Andrew Raycroft said, we don't need to worry about that until around September 1st. The hockey world is largely out of office at the moment. We saw last week a lot of Bruins, past and present, gathered over in, Croatia, I believe, to celebrate the marriage of David Pastrnak and his partner, Rebecca Rolson. Huge congratulations to them. A lot of guys on vacation, and we will soon start to see guys coming back into town, getting settled. On Instagram the other day, I saw Elias Lindholm and his partner getting settled in Boston. So as guys start to trickle back, we'll see that Jeremy Swayman contract talk heat up even more. It got me wondering, though, whether that could be a domino towards revisiting some guys who remain unrestricted free agents, namely James Van Riemsdyk and Kevin Shattenkirk, contributing members to last year's squad who are still unsigned. Now, yes, both of these players are advanced in age in terms of hockey years. Both guys are 35 years old, but they were serviceable members of the team last season. And with still some holes to fill on the roster, it made me wonder if perhaps there is something in the works where once Swayman is signed, Don Sweeney will reapproach these two guys. Now, again, it's kind of surprising that both guys are still free agents. Yes, they're 35, but despite the fact that they're not going to be day one signings, it's still kind of hard to believe that not a single team thinks they can get something out of either James Van Riemsdyk or Kevin Shattenkirk. Look, the Bruins did last year. Let's start with James Van Riemsdyk. He scored 38 points, 11 goals, 27 assists, and although his numbers aren't what they used to be, he still provided the Bruins with great value at just $1 million against the cap. Look, James Van Riemsdyk, again, he's not the player he once was. He's not going to be challenging for 30 goals anymore. 20 is probably a stretch. 11 goals in 71 games last year. He had 1 goal, 4 assists in 11 playoff games. He did kind of fall off down the stretch whether due to illness or injury. But still, he's still a contributing member of the team last year. He was able to play up and down the lineup. He was a net front presence on the power play. And that's a spot where he has done a lot of damage over the course of his career. Shattenkirk, when the Bruins were cleaning out their lockers back in May, he said, "Even at my age, quote, it's great to be in a competitive atmosphere every day. It drove me this year. It made me hungry." And Van Riemsdyk does not have a Stanley Cup on his resume. He was a second overall pick in 2007. He's been in the postseason several times over the course of his career, both with the Philadelphia Flyers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, this past season with the Bruins. In fact, he's played a full season's worth of playoff hockey in his career. 82 games, 21 goals, 15 assists for 36 points. But he does not have that Stanley Cup on his resume. After the Bruins were eliminated from the playoffs, Van Riemsdyk said, "At the end of the day, we all play to win the last game of the year. It's all about having a chance to win. You want to be in a place where it's a good fit as far as what you bring to the table and the role you'll be playing." Van Riemsdyk this past season was celebrated for playing his 1,000th NHL game. And yeah, that elusive Stanley Cup certainly is on his radar. That's something that he wants to accomplish before he retires. And you could argue that the Bruins are closer at the moment than they were going into last season. Of course, last season was a transition year. Van Riemsdyk, Shattenkirk were brought in as value veteran signings to help transition from Patrice Bergeron, David Krejci, and move into this season where they were able to add Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov. They have Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha, Matt Poitras down the middle. They do have holes on the wing, though. I've talked about this many times this summer with the departures of Danton Heinen, Jake DeBrusk, guys who were in the top six at some point last season. Yes, they brought in Max Jones. Yes, Fabian Lysell is going to get a shot to play second line right wing duties. But revisiting James Van Riemsdyk at $1 million or perhaps even less to play in the bottom six and perhaps be featured on one of the power play units. Maybe they see Max Jones filling that, but it would still be smart to bring in or bring Van Riemsdyk back, a guy who's familiar with the system, a guy who contributed last season, and who will be pretty cheap, seeing as either there is not really a market for him or he's waiting to see if the Bruins have any space left for him after signing Jeremy Swayman. And we'll talk about that bit later on in the show. Coming up, we're going to discuss perhaps the possibility that the same thing is in play for Kevin Shattenkirk, and we'll touch on him here as the podcast continues. The Olympics are over. We're pretty much focusing on baseball these days. NFL right around the corner with some exhibition games going on. But let's be honest, the sports don't sports like we want them to here in the month of August. But FanDuel is giving you the opportunity to stay engaged and get in the game with daily boosts and bonuses. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long over at FanDuel, where they're hooking you up with a daily boost or a bonus. All you have to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. Head over to FanDuel.com to make the most out of your summer. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and you can get over there, check out the latest on the Boston Red Sox, for example, their next game against the Texas Rangers, the over-under is set at 9 runs. So check out FanDuel.com, get in those daily boosts and bonuses. FanDuel is an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, unlike James Van Riemsdyk, Kevin Shattenkirk does have a Stanley Cup to his name, so he could easily slide off into the sunset, having a pretty great career on his record. But he made it clear at the end of last season that he's still looking to play. He's still hungry. He still wants to be in that competitive atmosphere, and perhaps that could be with the Boston Bruins. Now, the Bruins do have 7 defensemen signed to NHL contracts, and 7 pretty good ones at that, between Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Brandon Carlo, Andrew Peeke, Mason Lohrei, and Parker Wotherspoon. There still is room for depth there, because once you get to the AHL roster, it's pretty thin in terms of NHL experience. Jordan Osterley's in there. Billy Sweezy was signed. But then you're looking at guys like Jackson Edward, who's still very raw. Ryan Mast, only 21. Ian Mitchell could be called up, as could Alec Regula. Maybe Michael Callahan gets a shot. But there's a very real opportunity there for Shattenkirk to come back as a depth defenseman. Shattenkirk said after last season, you play for a great team like Boston and a competitive team, and you realize that you still have some value and can have a role. He learned that he's a different player now than he once was, and he has to accept a different role, and he's comfortable with that. Now, Shattenkirk, again, like Van Riemsdyk, doesn't appear to have anything lined up for this upcoming season. Still remains unsigned. He was a 14th overall pick in 2007, the same draft as James Van Riemsdyk. Last season, he chipped in 24 points in 61 games, which is still pretty good for a player who, in and out of the lineup, not quite at the same level as some of his younger peers. However, he, like Van Riemsdyk, could play that depth role in and out of the lineup, specializing with some power play time if the Bruins are lacking a quarterback or the power play struggling a little bit. Shattenkirk is a guy that, again, played with the Bruins last season, comfortable with the team, comfortable with the city, comfortable with his role. He's on the verge of eclipsing the 1,000 game mark. Like Van Riemsdyk, he could do that in black and gold. I mean, it's a very real possibility, again, that he could be kind of on the back burner as the Bruins wait to see what happens with Jeremy Swayman. Both Van Riemsdyk and Shattenkirk have made a lot of money. They probably shouldn't expect anything more than $1 million at this point in their careers, but that could very well suit the Bruins, who, once they sign Swayman, could have some money left over to offer these veterans. Again, they're up against the cap at $8.6 million remaining, and they do have Swayman to sign. But guys on the active roster at the moment could be sent down, like a Patrick Brown, who's making $800,000, like Vinny Lettieri, who's making $775,000. You take those guys off the roster, you give those same contracts to Shattenkirk and Van Riemsdyk, and you have a more veteran-laden roster, guys who can come in and provide that leadership that this team doesn't necessarily need, but they don't not need it either. You don't have to have these old guys who, slow down the team maybe, or who don't provide as much value on the ice as they do off it, but you don't not need those guys either. There's a reason the Oilers brought Corey Perry in after he was dumped by the Chicago Blackhawks. There's a reason that the Florida Panthers traded for Kyle Okposo at the deadline last season. There's room for these guys, and they play important roles on and off the ice, especially a guy like Van Riemsdyk, who has not yet tasted hockey's holy grail. That could really push some of these young guys to see you can go your whole career and not win the cup. And the further you get, the closer it gets to the end, the hungrier you are for that final push. It was the same a couple years ago with having Nick Foligno around. Guys who are so hungry for that cup, so hungry for glory, and they push those younger guys and remind them that, yeah, you might think you have your whole career ahead of you and that it's always going to be up and up towards the greatest prize, but it's quite possible that you never get there. And it's important to have that reminder to push you to be your best. I think especially with Van Riemsdyk, there could be room there because of the loss of DeBrusk and Heinen. Lysel's going to get a shot on the wing, but as much as he's earned a shot, it's not guaranteed that he'll grab it and run with it from day one. So there could be maybe Trent Frederick goes up to the second line and Van Riemsdyk steps into that spot, or Max Jones goes up to the third line and Van Riemsdyk just plays fourth line minutes with some power play time. Maybe Shattenkirk's just around to be a mentor and spot start some guys here and there in the case of injury or what have you, because we know that's going to come. Now, all of this, of course, is dependent on what's left over when they signed Jeremy Swayman. We continue to wait for that contract, and we'll touch on that here again as the podcast continues. There's really not a ton to report on the Jeremy Swayman front. Again, he, along with several other Bruins, were off in Europe last weekend for the Pasternak wedding. A lot of guys on vacation. And as Andrew Raycroft said last week, there's not really time to worry until maybe around September as training camp draws closer. On a Pro Hockey Rumors mailbag written by Brian LaRose, there was a question that I thought was pretty interesting. What's going on with Swayman? How far apart do you think they are? Could Swayman's camp be asking for more than the Bruins have remaining under the cap? What's he going to do? Sit out? And here's the response from Brian LaRose. With no arbitration option this time around, both sides passed on filing, and Don Sweeney said it was going to be a negotiated contract this time around. There's no real pressure point on either side for a while yet, so this probably will drag out for a little while longer. It's hard to guess how far they're apart, as part of the issue is that they're still working on deals of varying lengths, meaning the gap will be different for each one. So there could be a short-term deal on the table, mid-term, long-term, each carrying different valuations. His guess is they're not overly close, and until they get closer to training camp, where one side might move a little, don't expect to see much news on that front. However, he doesn't see Swayman's camp asking for more than $8.6 million per season. That's what the Bruins have in available cap space. His career high in games played in a single season is 44. He's not even truly proven as an undisputed number one. He's heading in that direction, but hasn't played enough to get there yet. The end result on a long-term deal starts with 7, maybe 8 times 8 at the most. If they wind up on more of a medium-term agreement, the cost probably begins with a 6. I think maybe the Bruins are angling for more that maybe a 5-year deal, $6 million per season. That would put him as one of the higher paid goalies in the league, outside the top 5 as we looked at last season, but right up there with like Jordan Binnington, Jacob Markstrom, guys who are more established as bona fide number ones. That's not to say Swayman isn't and can't be that guy, but he hasn't been yet, and perhaps that's the hesitancy in awarding him that kind of long-term deal. I don't think there's any doubt that he can and will be that guy. But again, save for that playoff performance, which is a small sample size, he hasn't really had the ball to run with for an extended period of time, like even a handful of starts in a row. So that's where things stand at the moment. They're probably looking at different lengths, different valuations. Things will get more serious here as the summer comes to an end. And of course, as we get to the start of training camp, which I believe is September 18th or 19th. The deadline, of course, is December 1st. If he's not signed by then he cannot play this season. Getting back to Shattenkirk, Van Riemsdyk, in another question, LaRose says he does see Boston being active on the PTO front to see if they can get a decent veteran or two as a hedge against the youngsters struggling, or maybe signing Swayman to a shorter term deal, opening up more cap flexibility. Maybe that's where the Swayman domino falls and they come back to Van Riemsdyk, Shattenkirk, or maybe they explore other options like another former Bruin in Blake Wheeler. And we are going to discuss that on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, or this week at the very least. We're going to talk about some guys within the organization that are perhaps under the radar in terms of jumping up and grabbing a spot. And we'll talk about more of these veteran guys or younger options that could still be available that the Bruins might look at depending on their cap situation following the Swayman contract. That's it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. Thank you so much for taking some time to join me in this Bruins discussion. I hope you all had a great weekend, are enjoying your summers. Please do subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Tell a friend about Locked On Bruins. Retweet, share the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. I'm at Ian C. McLaren, and we'll talk to you again here on the next episode, which will probably be Wednesday. Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.